Sorry for staying in sitting position, but I have a problem with my hip. So I have to speak about adolescent revolution. And it is really a revolution, even under the definition that Aristotle many centuries ago gave of a revolution, a complete change from one state to a totally different one. And adolescence is exactly that, just with one slight difference, that it's not a single moment, it's a long period of time, starting with the first signs of pubertal changes up to the end of height growth and the end, possibly, of cognitive development, which is the late adolescence. And being such a long period of time, you have many aspects of the life of a person going to change, and some of them are changing dramatically, like the rapid growth. You have up to 14 centimeters per year during a period of time of 2 to 4 years, but it is not a steady velocity, and it doesn't happen at the same time for everybody. And contemporarily, you also have pubertal and sexual development, which means that body perception needs a rapid readaptation. Often the body is ready, but the brain not yet. So it means that teens need to make a break with the past, which can be quite a difficult task. What the adolescent break is was clearly defined by Guidano, which was one of the masters of the systemic psychological approach, saying that the main indicator of a well-established adolescence is the ability to establish a satisfying relationship with oneself and one's body. Because with the eruption of the abstract thought, all schemes must be remodeled, and break of symmetry requires a reorganization, a precise position taken, even in exaggerated forms, in front of life. So you can think and possibly imagine, and this is what we do usually, that these are examples of a satisfied adolescence, and that this is what we have to cope with every day. But actually, more frequently, we have to cope with this kind of persons, when not even worse than that, like in the case of the disturbances of eating behavior. And we have to be aware that all adolescents may fall prey to unhealthy behavior in any phase of the adolescence. During the early adolescence, there is no ability to consider the risk for health. It is an ability extremely reduced because they are short-sighted. If you say you will have diabetes later on, you will have a bad cholesterol, they don't care, and they don't think it's something so far away that it is not worth thinking of it. During the real adolescence, there is the search for independence and the search for peers, and this may have a strong influence on the way you organize your eating and lifestyles. And then, during the late adolescence, 18 up to 21 or 22 years, but often far beyond that, the so-called delayed adolescence, independence is the most central point, and the struggle for it and for social acceptance may influence negatively the general behavior and the adherence to healthy lifestyles. It was very well exposed by Dave Van Kam a few minutes ago that we are a network. So the youth is not the only one facing and coping with changes. There are parents, there is family, there are peers and friends, teachers, doctors, everybody. All of them sharing the same task, and all of them obliged to cooperate in accordance with their respective role, their age, and their responsibility in order to give rise to the adult. I stressed here one point, but I'll come back to that point, knowing their limits later on. Now, we might think that adolescent and nutrition don't have many differences from the other moments of the life. At the end of the day, a child eats, a teen eats, an adult eats. It's always the same process and always the same purpose. But eating is not just introducing food. It has a lot of relational, biochemical, and physiological aspects. And the relational aspects, especially during adolescence, may outdistance all the other aspects and may become the most important one. As for the physiology, the needs of an adolescent are quite different from before and after. For instance, they need much more energy, much more iron, especially in girls, calcium and phosphorus, zinc, especially in boys, and this can affect the behavior and then can affect the physiology and the health, especially when you put together, you blend together relational and physiologic aspects, which can lead to an explosive mix. I give you a couple of examples here. As for iron, 80% of iron, if we follow the Mediterranean diet, is non-organic, and 70% of it comes from vegetables, legumes, cereals, fruits. Wow, exactly the foods that adolescents usually don't love. As for calcium, the absorption of calcium is much better than that of iron, which is 10%. Here we have a 30%, but it's still quite low. And if you have to reach 1 gram per day or more, like in this case, it can be difficult. It can be difficult in adolescents especially, or also because water is partly substituted by sugar-sweetened drinks and partly by bottled water. And bottled water often, at least in Italy, but I think it is more or less the same everywhere, is often low in calcium. If you put together with the fact that there is often a low intake of milk and dairy foods, you can say that you can have a problem in calcium intake. Now, as for the nutritional choices the adolescents do, well, the individual eating choices have greater and greater importance. Why? Because becoming older, the teens want and need to have a greater independence and autonomy and ask to control what they are eating and what they eat. So there is still a vulnerability. Once it was secondary because it was mediated by parents who went to the market to buy food, etc. Now is a primary one because there are personal choices intervening. But it's still a high vulnerability because you have active control, but often there is a lack of knowledge. And about lack of knowledge, the worst thing is that teens think to know everything. According to all the recent surveillance, adolescents feel like they have enough information about what they eat and drink, but actually you can see that more than 40% of them are scarcely to not at all informed. They get information especially from internet, from television, from friends, and you see, I stressed that point because it is important. Only 16% from school and only 7% on average from health figures, which is nothing. A special focus was made about drinks. 3/4 of the interviewed adolescents chose a drink for its taste, okay? And 1/4 because I know what it contains, but actually they don't. Or in most cases, they don't. So knowing everything means that the old family traditions can be refused because they are old, they belong to fathers or relatives that are not mine. And thanks also to the help of an aggressive marketing, globalized tastes and globalized foods can substitute the traditional ones. And so eating fast food or junk food becomes something attractive. The low quality is not a problem for a teen. But for us, in the healthy environment, there is a linked problem because the regular consumption of fast food and junk food reduces the perception of the importance of eating the most typical Mediterranean foods such as fruit, vegetables, and legumes again, which makes it difficult to maintain a good shape and health. The major eating issues in adolescents can be summarized this way. They eat too much energy, proteins, sugars, hidden fats, and drinks different from water. On the contrary, they have too little of complex carbohydrates, fruits and vegetables, legumes, sea products, and in many cases also of milk and dairy products. If you want to translate eating issues into nutritional issues, it is clear that adolescents show the highest prevalence of nutritional deficits. They can have deficits in calcium, iron, a lot of vitamins. They have fats more than the desired intake. Potato-derived products cover more than a quarter of the vegetable intake, which is too much, of course, and simple sugars exceed the intake of complex carbohydrates and fibers. Again, especially, not only, but especially thanks to an aggressive marketing. Given these premises, what can we do? Well, it is difficult to tell what can make a bad revolution a good one, a healthy one. But it is easier to identify unsuccessful aspects of it. Adults, including health personnel, unfortunately, tend to transfer their way of thinking and their way of seeing life to the adolescents instead of trying to understand what they think. And examples of unsuccessful approaches are picturing frightening scenarios about their future health. They don't care about it. Stimulating actively the adolescent to follow the example of adults. Oh, my God, adults, they are old people. And pointing to a more adequate peer, but the most adequate peer usually is not the most popular one. It's boring. So, as I said before, everybody of us has to know the limits, which is a really important point. For instance, adolescence finds affective and expressive spaces not in the family, but in the peers group. And the families must be aware of this. It is common, it is normal, it is physiologic to do so. And among peers, the teen can find cultural models of identification. He can assume styles and ways of behaving in accordance to the group. And so dressing, eating, acting will be put in accordance with the group, not with the most good thing. Especially because inside the group, the teen is accepted as a person, which means a personality, and a body. And the need of being accepted is such a, well, on one side it is very physiologic, of course, but it is a disorienting emotion. The result is that the teen rarely feels right. And these are things that the adolescent should know, should be made aware of. Because at that time, if you are not perfect, you are not accepted, and if you are not accepted, you are not loved. And it is all about love. So, I will finish with some tips for everybody. Starting with the family, of course. Now, in the family, it was already said several times during these 2 days, exposure to examples is much more effective than exposure to words. The family has to give and to keep rules. First for themselves, not only for the other. If you give rules, you have to respect them. And rules are important because they are needed by the adolescents, even though they are fought by them. But an adolescent without rules is like a vagabond in the desert. They don't know where to go. They are so free, they have no limit or boundaries, that everywhere can be okay. So, especially in adolescence, rules are there and they are made to be broken. But they have a meaning. They mean that there is a pathway. You can leave it, but you do that at your own risk. In the school, not in the classroom. The classroom is not the setting for giving good example. But if there is a canteen, one of the most effective strategy is to make unhealthy food possible, but a little bit more difficult or long-lasting to get with respect to the healthy choices which are easy available. And again, in the school, if there are vending machines, the only strategies up to now that has been found to be good is to substitute unhealthy foods with healthier ones. With peers, well, also with peers, we must take advantage of the keenness of teens to technology. Apps and social can be a winning strategy to catch teens' interest, but of course they have to counteract the way other apps and other social can influence the behavior of the teen. And last thing, at the doctors. Doctors are experts, but they cannot be teachers. They have enough of teachers at school. So the most important thing is to put ourselves at the same eye level with the adolescent, not speaking over their heads. So being teachers without teaching, being an expert without stressing to be an expert, listening much more than speaking, and sharing the strategies with the adolescent, not dictating them. Thanks for your attention.